Well, again, happy Father's Day. I just want to say happy Father's Day to my dad, because Dad, I know you'll watch this later. I think it's very touching that you would watch your kid preach. I don't know if I would watch me preach, but you do, and that's very kind of you. So happy Father's Day. You're awesome. I love you, and I literally wouldn't be here without you. So thank you. Happy Father's Day. And happy Father's Day to all of y'all in the room. Real quick housekeeping issue, real quick. This will be the last time I preach until the first Sunday in August. And you say, why do you do that? Well, we do that for a couple reasons. It's healthy for us to hear from other people, and we've got some other folks that we're going to hear from, like we heard from Lamar last week, and that was awesome. If you missed it, watch it on YouTube. He did a phenomenal job. But it's healthy for us to hear from other people. It gives us a chance to develop people. You'll hear from Sean Payne, our Encounter interim director next week, and also our church planting apprentice. And if he's going to plant a church, he needs to preach some, right? Because that's kind of something pastors do. And so we get to hear from him a couple times. And so that's just healthy. And then just from a personal standpoint, it's just healthy for me to place myself under preaching from time to time, because it can be so easy just doing what I do to get out of that. But it's just healthy for me on a spiritual level to place myself under the teaching of God's Word as on a regular basis. And this gives me a chance to do that during the month, during the last part of June and then all through July. So I'm looking forward to just kind of being a sheep and being shepherded by other people during that. So it'll be fun. So y'all guys, make sure y'all are here for that. If you have a Bible and you want to follow along, two primary places will be today. We'll be in 1 Samuel chapter 18 and then primarily in Matthew chapter 25. So you can kind of mark both of those places. In community time, we talked about food envy, and I'm just curious, how many of you guys, you really, really, really suffer from food envy bad when you're out with other people? Really? So all of y'all are always happy with what you get at a restaurant. You never look at somebody else and you're like, dang it. So there's three of us, okay, so maybe next week we'll talk about honesty, all right? I don't know. But here's how it works out for us. So this is like a recurring theme in my life. Like I'll be kind of excited about something, and then my wife will either make something or order something, and it just saddens me over what I had. So this past Monday, I forget what I had for breakfast, but I was going to have oatmeal for lunch, and I just eat the same thing just about every day, and I'm reasonably content with it. But around lunchtime, I was outside for some reason. I walked back in the house, and just like this amazing smell assaulted my nostrils, and I went over, and Grace had cooked up some delicious chicken dish for her lunch and that sort of thing. So I can't go steal out of it because that's her lunch. And then I was like, this looks awesome. There's cheese, feta cheese, and feta cheese is glorious. There's zucchini, there's chicken. It smells amazing. And I got oatmeal. I generally like oatmeal, but I don't know if my oatmeal's ever tasted so goopy and just kind of, food envy. It happens to me all the time. Maybe it happens to you. Maybe you can relate more to house envy, right? You're maybe reasonably satisfied with your house until your friend moves into a house and they're like, our new pad, it's awesome. And you're like, look at all the cracks in the walls, and the paint looks like crap, and the floorboards are dinged up, and this carpet is probably at least 20 years old. And you just kind of get, or maybe vacation envy. Anybody get vacation envy in a room? And maybe you're taking a budget vacation, and you're looking forward to it until you have the friend who they have the awesome vacation. You know what I'm saying? They went to Italy, and you're like, man, I don't even know if I want to go on vacation now because it's just going to suck compared to theirs, right? We have these sorts of things. We see somebody else has something, and then we want it, and those are kind of lighthearted, right? But that can happen in other areas of life, right? Like maybe you are in a situation where you're reasonably happy in your career, but then you see somebody else is in a career and they're a lot more happy and they make a lot more money, and you're like, well, my career just kind of sucks. Or maybe you're trying to be a good dad and you're on a budget and you get your kid this little place set, it's what you can afford, and you're like, oh man, this is awesome. And then the neighbor next door, they buy their kid the awesome playground, and then you're like, I just feel like a failure as a dad, and that sort of thing. Here's what envy does, and that's really what that is when we start having that. It's envy. What envy does is this. It really nukes your ability to really actually enjoy what you actually have, right? And here's what I'm not talking about. I'm not talking about looking at somebody that for instance, somebody has this really amazing, deep, close walk with the Lord. I'm not talking about looking at somebody like that and saying, man, I want that, and then asking, how do I take those steps? I'm talking about some of these other things like these very material things, and then wishing, oh man, and thinking along the lines of this, well, if I just had what they had, I could be happy. And that's how we tend to think, right? And it just nukes our ability to actually enjoy our life. And that's why Proverbs 14:30 says this. And this is one of the reasons I love the Bible. It's one of the weird reasons we believe it is God's word, because it just speaks what is actually true about life, right? Proverbs 14:30 says this: envy rots the bones. In other words, when we envy other people, when we want what they have, when we think, well, if I just had whatever they had, then I would be happy, then it just destroys our ability to actually enjoy what we actually have. It rots our bones. It makes us miserable. And I think there's a good chance some of us come in here like that today. Like we just have this kind of sense of deep-seated misery because, man, we were just envying people. And in fact, I would pose two questions this morning. They won't be on the screen, but I want you to jot them down. I think they'll be helpful to think about. The first one is this. What if the reason I can't enjoy my life as it is because I'm constantly looking at the life of somebody else? Maybe you come in here, man, you're just not satisfied in life. But could it be that the problem is not so much you like the life you have, and I'm not saying there are not certain situations that they need to be fixed, right? But so often it's not the life you have, it's the fact that, man, you just are constantly measuring your life by somebody else and you just never measure up, and it just kind of destroys your ability to really be content in your life. That's the first question. What if the only reason I can't enjoy my life, or the primary reason I can't enjoy my life, is I'm always looking at someone else? And the second one is this, and this really goes into where we're heading with this series. What if the primary reason I have a hard time loving other people is because I'm envious of at least one person? And the reason for that is simple, is because when envy sprouts in our lives and takes root in our lives, what happens is when we turn from others focused to being very self-centered, and when you're self-centered, you're just not going to be very loving towards other people. And I've experienced this, guys. I'm not a perfect pastor, and I try to just be very honest about that. But man, later last year, I was hanging out with a friend for a couple of days, and man, I just found myself just really antagonistic and very, very kind of like unnecessarily combative with this friend of mine. And the Lord convicted me of it, and I was like, okay, man, I don't even like how I am right now. Or like, what's going on? And God's like, man, you've got an envy problem, because. And this is how messed up I am, guys. And God's like, it's because He makes way more money than you do. You got an envy problem. And because you have an envy problem, you're just very antagonistic and very combative. So I had to repent for that, and I had to apologize to my friend and that sort of thing. But man, it just goes to show the point, guys. When we envy, man, it makes us miserable. We can't enjoy what we have, and it sours our relationships, and we just can't love people. And that's why 1 Corinthians 13 says this, where we're going through this all summer. It says, love is patient, love is kind. Then it says, it does not envy. It does not envy. If you're going to be a really, genuinely, truly loving person, you have to eliminate envy from your life. You can't envy people. You can't look at other people and think, man, if I just had what they had, well, whatever that thing happens to be, then I would be happy. You can't think that. Because as long as you're envying somebody, you simply can't love them. And so that does beg the question. It's like, okay, well, where does envy actually come from? And we kind of hit around it all morning, but the idea is this, you can jot it down. To eliminate envy, I must eliminate comparison, because envy starts with comparison. If I'm going to eliminate envy, I have to eliminate comparison, because envy starts with comparison. Comparison, you could say, is the root of envy. And if you've ever pulled weeds, then you know if you're going to get rid of the weed, you have to pull the root. For instance, I'm currently on the beginning of a 10-year or never-ending project to pull the weeds out of my lawn. You might say, what about your flower bed? I'm not really all that concerned about the flower bed. I don't care. But I really care about my grass, which makes the lack of rain we've had like really disturbing, and that sort of thing. But there are certain weeds in my grass that I want gone, and some of them are like really foul-smelling weeds, and they like really destroy my grass cutting experience, because I like my nostrils to be filled with the beautiful smell of fresh cut grass, not fresh cut weeds. For some of you, you're like, that sounds really weird, and I promise you I'm not doing anything illegal. Or that sort of thing. Talking about grass and weeds, maybe it gets a little confusing. But I will pull weeds in the mornings. Sometimes sometimes while I'm message prepping and just thinking about what I'm going to talk about or what the Lord would have me talk about, I'll get out there and pull weeds. And what I know I have to do is I have to get the root of the weed. I can't just get the top off, I have to get the root. So the point of all that is that comparison really is the root of envy. And to kind of demonstrate this, I want to take us to a passage we were actually in a couple weeks ago, 1 Samuel chapter 18, talking about David and Saul. Just background, if you're new to church, and if you are, man, I'm super, super glad you're here. But Saul was Israel's first king. But Saul had all sorts of problems. He was insecure. He was arrogant. He didn't obey God very well at all. And so eventually God's like, I'm going to replace you. And God raises up this guy named David. David is not king at this point in the story, but he's kind of stepped into a military role, and he actually kills a guy named Goliath. And it's this great military victory for Israel. And so David becomes a very successful military guy. And 1 Samuel 18:5 says this: whatever mission Saul sent him on, David was so successful that Saul gave him a high rank in the army. This pleased all the troops and Saul's officers as well. And when the men were returning home after David had killed the Philistine, the women came out from all the towns of Israel to meet King Saul with singing and dancing, with joyful songs and with timbrels and lyres. As they danced, they sang, Saul has slain his thousands, and David's his tens of thousands. This is just another way of saying Saul and David have slain thousands. It wasn't meant to be a slam on Saul, but Saul takes this super personally, like some of y'all do, like everything is personal, and you just need to know not everything is personal. And if you're like, well, I'm not that way, maybe you are, I don't know. Just throwing that out there. Saul was very angry. This refrain displeased him greatly. They have credited David with tens of thousands, he thought, but me with only thousands. What more can he get but the kingdom? And from that time on, Saul kept a close eye on David. And this sort of envy and jealousy is going to completely warp Saul's relationship with David. Now keep in mind, David is like one of his best warriors, like one of his top guys. But Saul gets so suspicious and so jealous that he tries to do stuff like this. It says, the next day an evil spirit from God came forcefully on Saul. He was prophesying in his house. While David was playing the lyre as he usually did, Saul had a spear in his hand, and he hurled it, saying to himself, I'll pin David to the wall. But David eluded him twice. He tries to kill him. He's so jealous and so envious that he's like, well, this guy is now a threat and needs to be eliminated. It's working against his own best interest. Then it says, verse 12, Saul was afraid of David because the Lord was with David but had departed from Saul. So Saul's relationship with David here is warped because of envy. And it just goes from bad to worse. Verse 17, Saul tries a different tactic. Saul says to David, here's my older daughter Merab. I will give her to you in marriage. Only serve me bravely and fight the battles of the Lord. For Saul said to himself, I will not raise a hand against them, but the Philistines do that. He's actively promoting David, not because he likes him, but because he's like, well, if I can get him in greater and greater conflict, maybe he will die. And that's really his goal here. But David said to Saul, who am I and what is my family or my clan in Israel that I should become the king's son-in-law? So when the time came for Merab, Saul's daughter, to be given to David, she was given in marriage to Adriel of Maholah. Now Saul's daughter Michal was in love with David. When they told Saul about it, he was pleased. I will give her to him, he thought, so that she may be a snare to him, and so the hand of the Philistines may be against him. In other words, he's thinking, hey, maybe this other daughter will distract David so much that eventually his mind will be on her instead of fighting, and he'll die. Like that's really Saul's goal here. And this is just messed up, right? Like you're trying to kill one of your best warriors. It just absolutely makes no sense. So Saul said to David, now you have a second opportunity to become my son-in-law. And then Saul ordered his attendants to speak to David privately and say, look, the king likes you, and all his attendants love you. Now become his son-in-law. And they repeated these words to David. But David said, do you think it's a small matter to become the king's son-in-law? I am only a poor man and little known. And when Saul's servants told him what David had said, Saul replied, say to David, the king wants no other price for the bride than 100 Philistine foreskins to take revenge on his enemies. Why foreskins? I don't know. David would love to answer that question later on. Saul's plan was to have David fall by the hands of the Philistines. Do you see how warped Saul's mind in here? And it all stems from jealousy. It all stems from envy. And it moves him to actively trying all these bizarre creative ways to get David killed. Can we agree that's just messed up? Yes, that's just messed up. And so David actually one-ups him here because it says when the attendants told David these things, he was pleased to become the king's son-in-law, I guess because he liked the challenge. I don't know. So before the allotted time elapsed, David took his men with him and went out and killed 200 Philistines and brought back their foreskins. They counted out the full number of the king to the king so that David might become the king's son-in-law, which is gross in all sorts of ways. So that David might become the king's son-in-law. Then Saul gave him his daughter Michal in marriage. And when Saul realized that the Lord was with David and that his daughter Michal loved David, Saul became still more and more afraid of him. And then watch this. And he remained his enemy the rest of his days. What happened? This one harmless little line, Saul's killed thousands, David tens of thousands. Not a big deal. But when you have envy in your soul, here's what happens. You end up living life as a zero-sum game with Ricky Bobby theology. You say, what's Ricky Bobby theology? If you're not first, you're last. That's Ricky Bobby theology. It's like, if I don't have the best, if I'm not a top dog, if everybody ain't looking at me, then my life sucks. And then what happens is you step on people and you try to use people or you work against people, even people that are really, really close to you, all in the name of you trying to be the best because you're jealous and because you're envious. And then the mistake Saul makes here is instead of measuring himself by, okay, I'm the king, I'm just trying to do what God put in my hands, he starts measuring himself by comparing himself to David. That's the mistake he makes. Now, here's the question I want us to think about. In what areas of your life are you measuring yourself by comparing yourself with other people? Maybe it's your income, maybe it's your ability, maybe it's your skill set, maybe it's your career, maybe it's your family. I don't know, but in what areas of your life are you measuring yourself and how effective you are or how successful you are, if we want to use that term, and you're measuring yourself by other people? Because that's a dead-end street. And we see what happens with Saul. It makes Saul miserable. It completely warps Saul's relationship with David. And it actually completely takes him off mission from being king. And he literally spends the rest of his life like trying to hunt down David and kill him. Not being king, not being in charge, not ruling the land, but trying to hunt down a guy that was on his side. And it all stems from jealousy. It all stems from envy. That is why, if you're going to eliminate envy from your life, you have to get rid of comparison, because envy springs from comparison. So how do we start to eliminate comparison? That's the idea. So 3 big ideas. How do we eliminate comparison? The first is this. We have to realize that God has given me exactly what he meant to give me. God's given me exactly what he meant to give me. Believe it or not, I am more or less the size that I was as a freshman in high school. When I was 15 years old, I was 5'9" 3/4", about 145 pounds. And background to this, my dad's side of the family, they're not very big. So I was already the tallest shoot at like 15 years old. And I was like, man, my mom's side of the family, some of them like 6 foot plus, like I'm going to be like 6'2", 6'3", because usually when you're 16, you hit a growth spurt, and I didn't even hit my growth spurt yet. I'm going to be tall, and then I guess the shoot genes kicked in, and I didn't grow no more. It's kind of disappointing. God did not give me the gift of height. At least not great height. I'm an average size guy. God did not give me the gift of stupidly fast reflexes so that I could, continue to play baseball at the next level and that sort of thing. Beyond college anyway. God did not give me the ability to jump or be a great basketball shooter. He just didn't. I'm not going to lie. It'd be nice to have those abilities, just to be honest. What he did give me was a pretty sharp mind. Like for whatever reason, writing out content has never been like super challenging for me. That's not a brag. That's just kind of how God has wired me. And he's given me the ability to talk and to communicate and that sort of thing. That's exactly what God meant to give Dylan Shoup. God didn't make a mistake when he's like, yeah, I'm going to give you enough baseball talent to play in college, but no more beyond that. God didn't make a mistake there. And God didn't make a mistake when he's like, I'm going to let you grow this tall, but no taller. God didn't even make a mistake when he's like, I'm going to make you start losing your hair at about age 30. And that's lighthearted, but the truth is this. God gave me exactly what he meant to give me. And then that extrapolates to all of life, right? Like God has you exactly where he has you because he meant to put you there. And I understand that can be very, very challenging to swallow if maybe you're in like a really negative or toxic situation. You might say, why did God put me there? I would say, I don't know. But he put you there because he meant to put you there. Yeah. God's giving you exactly what he meant to give you. And Paul makes this point in a discussion about spiritual gifts, and this is actually the context for 1 Corinthians chapter 13, talking about love. It's actually operating in your gifting in a loving manner. And he says this, there are different kinds of gifts, but the same Spirit distributes them. There are different kinds of service, but the same Lord. There are different kinds of working, but in all of them and in everyone, it is the same God at work. The idea is this, God gives people different things and different abilities. God didn't wire everybody to preach. And God didn't wire everybody to sing. God didn't wire everybody to have a desire to work with kids. God didn't make everybody this super welcoming, warm, bubbly person. God made some people to be shy. God made some people to love working behind the scenes. God made some people to love working with their hands in like some of these very technical things or like construction sort of things. God gave you exactly what he meant to give you. He's giving you the income level that he meant you to have. He's giving you the family that he meant you to have. God's giving you exactly what he meant you to have. And the other thing about this, even when we find areas where God's maybe giving you a similar gifting to somebody else, he doesn't give everybody the same talent level. For example, Matthew 25, this is primarily what will be the rest of the morning. It says this, verse number 14. Again, the kingdom of God, that's what the it is referring to there. It will be like a man going on a journey who called his servants and entrusted his wealth to him. To one he gave 5 bags of gold, to another 2 bags, and to another 1 bag, each according to his ability. Then he went on his journey. The idea is simply this. Man, they're all given gold, but they're not all given the same level of it. Here's an example practically how this applies. When anybody starts a church, which is what I did about 6 years ago, everybody that starts a church, generally speaking, like you want it to get really big. You say, why? That's just because we have a desire to reach a lot of people. And any pastor worth their salt will say, I want to see a lot of people. And pre-COVID, we had some really good momentum going. We probably had about 135 people here each week. We had about 220 people connected to the life of our church pre-COVID. Then COVID happened, and we went from 220 people connected to the life of our church to about 80, and from 135 on a Sunday to about 50. And pastors, I know this because that's what I do. We make up all sorts of reasons and theories as to why that happened. Some of it was like, well, maybe we're just losing dead weight, people who weren't involved anyway, weren't really contributors, just kind of consumers. Or we maybe say, well, God's pruning us and that sort of thing. And there's maybe some truth to that. But here's the humbling thing that I had to swallow, and it was this. John Maxwell has this idea that he calls the law of the lid, and that's like an organization or a church is never going to go beyond what their leader's capacity actually is. And you know what I had to swallow is like, man, maybe God was doing some pruning in other people, but man, maybe the primary person he wanted to prune was me. Because it's entirely possible that maybe God didn't make me to lead thousands. He might not even make me to lead hundreds. I don't know, you know? And so, and you might say, well, what has he made you to lead? I really don't know. But I know there are other people that he's given far more people than he's given me. And I've had to learn to be okay with that. And that's something all of us have to wrestle with, guys. Like, God has given exactly what he meant to give you. You might say, well, what about this other person that has a similar thing but more of it? You know what? If God wanted you to have more of it, he'd give you more of it. That's right. Because the thing is this, second idea, you can jot this down. It is not about what I wish I had. It's about putting what I have to work. Amen. It's not about, well, man, I wish I had more money, or in my case, more people or whatever. It's no, work with what you have. Work with what God's put in your hands. For instance, I used to suffer from lawn envy where I used to live. My neighbor across the street had just this glorious, beautiful, amazing centipede lawn. It was lush. It was always green. He had an irrigation system. And I just appreciate a good lawn. I just do. I know some of y'all are like, I don't care. I wish my grass would die so I didn't have to cut it. And I would just say, be gone, Satan, for that evil attitude. I just appreciate a good lawn. And so, man, I would look at his lawn and it's like, man, I wish my grass was that green. And then it hit me one day. I was like, maybe I should fertilize and water my own lawn. I didn't get it looking as good as his, but I did pretty good and that sort of thing. But man, that's what kind of messes us up in life is we spend so much time thinking about what we didn't have, what we wished we had, that, man, we never actually get to work on what we actually have. Proverbs 28:19 says this. It says, those who work their land will have abundant food, but those who chase fantasies will have their fill of poverty. Those who understand, okay, this is what God's given me. Well, let me just work really hard with this, and let me just work really hard on this. And instead of pining away and dreaming over what I wish I had or hoped I had, then just work really hard with this. Just work really hard with this. Well, we see this in both a positive way and a negative way in Matthew 25. Verse 16, it says, the man who had received 5 bags of gold went at once and put his money to work and gained 5 bags more. So also the one with 2 bags gained 2 more. But the man who had received 1 bag went off, dug a hole in the ground, and hid his master's money. Terrible decision. Why did he do that? I don't know. Well, we do know. He's going to say later on that he was afraid and scared and that sort of thing. I wonder if he was afraid and scared, though, perhaps because he was like, well, I can never get 5 bags more, or I can never get 2 bags more. Maybe I can get 1 bag, but I just don't think that's going to be impressive. And so I'm just going to not even try. I'm just going to stick it in the ground. Guys, that's where a lot of us are in life, just be honest. Is we're so consumed with what we don't have that we don't even put to work what we do have. This is what Paul has to say about that. 2 Corinthians chapter 10:12, he says, we do not dare to classify or compare ourselves with some who commend themselves when they measure themselves by themselves and compare themselves with themselves. They are not wise. We don't need to measure ourselves by other people. We don't need to compare ourselves to other people. He goes on to say this, we, however, will not boast beyond our proper limits, but will confine our boasting to the sphere of service God himself has assigned us. It's just another way of saying this. Don't measure yourself by other people. Measure yourself by, man, how faithful are you in stewarding what God has put in front of you right now, in this very moment. In whatever season of life you happen to be in, whether that's kids, no kids, empty nester, whether it's toddlers or teenagers, whether that is single or married, whether that is you're working in your dream job or, man, you're just in something to pay the bills, whether that is, man, you're in a season of financial abundance or you're in a season of, man, things are really tight. Well, whatever it is, instead of obsessing over, man, I wish I had blank, think instead about, man, how can I do a really, really good job with what God has put in my hands right now? Because the reality is this, third thing, ultimate fulfillment is not measuring up to others, but faithful stewardship of what I have. That's ultimate fulfillment. It's not measuring up to others. It's faithful stewardship of what I have. For instance, what I've learned over the last couple of years as a pastor is, man, I desire to reach more people. I want to reach more people. We will always be a church that wants to reach people. That's who we are. But you know what success for me as a pastor is now? It's not how many people sit in the seats on Sunday morning, although I'd love to see more people in the seats. That's just how I am. And honestly, I like larger crowds because I'm an introvert and then I can kind of hide and that sort of thing. It's just the way I'm wired. But, man, success for me, this has really clicked in like the last month for me. It's not how many people show up. It's not even necessarily what I say from stage. It's connecting with people. It's just checking in with people, saying, hey, how is life going and how can I pray for you? It's getting to know people and understand what is going on in their lives and how I can best serve them and how I can best pray for them. That's success because you know what that is? That is simply trying to be a very good steward of what God has already put in my hands. And what I am learning is that as you faithfully steward what God puts in your hands, that is actually the opening the door to God giving us more. But sometimes he doesn't give us more just because we're not great stewards to start with. But the goal is not to try to get more. The goal is, what does God put in my hands? Let me just do a really good job of that. If you have kids, man, just do a really good job of raising your kids. If you're married, just do a really good job of being a spouse. In your career, whatever job you happen to be working in, just do a really good job of working that career. If you're retired, just do a really good job of being retired. Just be very faithful in stewarding the season God has given you in an excellent way. And that'll fulfill you. And that's actually what Jesus commends here. Verse 19, Matthew 25, he says, after a long time, the master of those servants returned and settled accounts with them. The man who had received 5 bags of gold brought the other 5. Master, he said, you entrusted me with 5 bags of gold. See, I've gained more. His master replied, well done, good and faithful servant. He didn't say, oh, great. He didn't measure him by, you got 5 bags. He's like, no, you were faithful. You did exactly what I wanted you to do. You put it to work. I think he would have said, well done, good and faithful servant, even if the guy had been like, man, I put 5 bags in and it just didn't work, but I tried. I think he would have said, well done, good and faithful servant. You steward. I didn't want you to sit on it. I want you to put it to work. And he says, yeah, and then he says this, you've been faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Come and share in your master's happiness. And then the man who had received 1 bag of gold came, master. Oh, the same thing happened with the guy that did 2 bags. Verse 22, the man with 2 bags also came. Master, he said, you entrusted me with 2 bags of gold. See, I've gained 2 more. And his master replied, well done, good and faithful servant. You've been faithful with a few things. I'll put you in charge of many things. Come and share in your master's happiness. Notice he noticed this. He gives the same response to the guy that gained 2 as opposed to the guy that gained 5. The commendation there was not based on the gross total that was added. It was just in the fact that they put it to work. Then we get to the guy who stuck his stuff in the ground. It says, the man who had received 1 bag of gold came. Master, he said, I knew you were a hard man, harvesting where you've not sown and gathering where you've not scattered, so I was afraid. He was afraid of losing it. I think he might have also been afraid of not being able to measure up to the other guys. I was afraid, and I went out and I hid your gold in the ground. Here's what belongs to you. And his master replied, you wicked, lazy servant. So you knew that I harvest where I've not sown and gather where I've not scattered seed. Well, then you should have put my money on deposit with the bankers so that when I returned it, I would have received it back with interest. And we know interest isn't necessarily going to double it, right? But there's going to be a return on it. Like the master would have even commended a small return if he just put it to work. And then he says, so take the bag of gold from him and give it to the one who has 10 bags. For whoever has will be given more, and they'll have an abundance. Whoever does not have, even what they have will be taken from them. And throw that worthless servant outside into the darkness where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. What was the problem here? The problem was the guy just didn't put what he had to work. And that is what is going to keep us from being fulfilled. That's actually what feeds envy in our lives, is when we look at other people and how successful we think they are, and as a result, we don't even put to work what we have. But we miss the fact that ultimate fulfillment is not measuring myself to some other person by that standard. Ultimate fulfillment is, what has God put in my hands, and am I doing a good job with that? That's the question. Am I doing a good job with what God has put in my hands? So here's what has to happen. We have to get our eyes off other people, stop obsessing over what other people have, get them onto Jesus, and then just simply get them onto the assignment that God has put in front of your hands right now, and doing a very, very good job with that. Simply this, we say all the time, we're called to live for God and love all people and lead others to do the same. Just make it your life's goal to do that in whatever realm you happen to be in. Just do that. And that'll actually make you more and more like Jesus, because it'll be just being faithful to what God's station in life for you is. It'll be being faithful in where God has put you. Guys, Jesus modeled that his whole life. Because God didn't send Jesus to be like a royal prince. That's probably how we would have set it up, right? No, he sent him to be the child of a young girl named Mary and a young guy named Joseph, and then to live 30 years in obscurity as a carpenter. I don't know about you, but I tend to think Jesus was probably an excellent carpenter. He didn't go around preaching his first 30 years, just a carpenter. And then when God told him it was time to go public and be baptized, he went and he did that faithfully. And then when God told him it was time to, gather 12 guys to him, he did that faithfully. And when God told him to preach, he did that faithfully. And Jesus was simply about one thing. And he said it in the temple when he was just 12 years old. He said, man, I've got to be in my Father's house. Or other translations say, I've got to be about my Father's business. And that was just doing whatever the Father put in front of him, which ultimately was not restoring the kingdom to Israel, not overthrowing the Roman government. That's what the disciples wanted him to do. But it was ultimately going to a cross to die. And from an outside perspective, like that seems like such a waste, right? Here's this miracle worker. Here's this guy who can raise dead people, who seems very powerful, and he lets himself be arrested and killed. From an outside perspective, that's a waste, but the reality is, no, that was faithfulness. And his faithfulness made the way for us to come back to God. What's going to make the biggest impact, because that's what God calls us to do. He calls us to impact others' lives. He calls us to be difference makers. What will make the biggest impact in the people around you is probably not that you make it really big or do huge, awesome, mind-blowing, amazing things. It'll be just your faithful stewardship over what God has put in front of you right this very second. That's what it'll be. That's what it'll be. As a dad now, and I would say this to all the dads, I really do think the biggest impact you will ever make in your life is not something you do, not something you accomplish, but somebody that you raise. And that's the thing I'm chewing on a dad is that, man, my biggest impact is as much as I love pastoring, as much as I love preaching, as much as I love ministry, man, I want to be content with the idea that the biggest impact I will make is not something that I do, is not leading this church. It'll be the boys that I raise. And that seems very, very small, especially when it's like, well, don't you want to impact other people? Yeah, I'd love to impact hundreds, thousands of people. But man, ultimate success is what has God put in front of me right now? And how faithful am I in stewarding that? And sometimes it's the things that seem very, very small and don't seem very, very broad that actually creates the deepest impact, especially when it's leveraged in a way that matters forever. So how are you doing on that? I just want us to think about that. How are you doing on that? Are you trying to, measure up to somebody else, measure up to some other standard, or is the deepest desire of your heart, man, God, help me just to be faithful where I am right now? And when you do that, that puts your eyes on the Lord. That starts to eliminate envy. And that actually starts to make you a really loving person, because instead of trying to do things to make yourself feel good, you start to do things that honor God but also build up others. And that starts to make you into the type of loving person that really does look a whole lot like Jesus. And that impacts people. And it impacts them forever. So let's pray. Father God, help us just to be faithful with what you've put in our hands right now. Help us be discerning over what you've put in our hands right now, over what we're actually responsible for. Don't let us obsess over the things that we have no control over. Don't let us obsess over bigger and better, because bigger is not always better. Help us just to be very faithful with what and who you've put in our lives right now. So heads bowed and eyes closed this morning, just two questions. First off, how many of you would say, man, I do struggle with measuring myself compared to others, and I just want God to deal with me in that? Would you just be honest? Just lift your hand up today. Awesome. Fantastic. Father, I do pray for those that have struggled with comparison. And God, I pray that they would not measure themselves by other people, but would just simply measure themselves by simply being faithful with what you've put in their hands, and then ultimately leaving the results up to you. And then for others of you this morning, man, maybe you're here and, man, you've never given your life to Christ. In fact, maybe the most important thing you heard this morning was that Jesus primary purpose was to come and to die on a cross for our sin. And you may say, well, why did he do that? And the reason he did that was very simply this. It was because it was the only way for us to come back to God. Because trying to be good would not cut it. God is holy. We're sinful. Scripture teaches even on our best day, our righteous acts are like filthy rags. We can't cut it. We can't get ourselves back to God. But God in his love sent Jesus to live the life we couldn't live and die the death that we should have died. And he did it so that through him we could come into a relationship with God and be saved. So if you've never done that, if you've never given your life to Christ, I want to give you the opportunity to do that. And there's no magic prayer. God's looking at the posture of your heart. And it would look something like this. It would look like saying, Father, I'm a sinner, and I've run from you, and I'm far from you, and I can't be good enough. But Jesus, I believe you died on the cross, and I believe you rose from the grave. I believe you're the only way to be saved. And I'm trusting you for salvation. And you're in charge now. And I'll go wherever you tell me to go and do whatever you tell me to do, regardless of the cost. And if that was you this morning, I'll just ask you to do two things. One would be take the connection card in front of your seat and just fill that out. And don't bring it by the Connection Center. Afterwards, there's going to be a couple folks here at the front that are going to would love to talk to you about baptism. Baptism is your very first step after salvation. But if you've never been baptized by immersion after salvation, then baptism is your next step. And we'd love to have that conversation with you. So, Father, thank you for this morning. Make us into loving people, Lord. Make us patient, make us kind. Don't let us envy. Don't let us measure ourselves by others. And help us just to be faithful with what you put in front of us. And Jesus, I love you and ask all these things in your name. Amen.